Already welcome back to the City Till We Die podcast. The 16-year unbeaten record is over. Norwich City suffer a first East Anglian derby defeat since 2009 at Portman Road, 3-1 on Sunday afternoon. I'm sure much of this podcast won't really be about dissecting that game and maybe some of the same problems that Norwich City have been facing over the course of this season thus far. So we'll get stuck into it because there's plenty of meat on the bone this podcast episode. Adam Harvey joined by Ben Ambrose as per usual. Ben, 16 years unbeaten record has come to an end. I guess what are your main reflections looking back now on that game a couple of days on?
Very much, they've stayed pretty consistent since the full-time whistle went. Even from about half-time, really. I was 8 years old, as discussed on the last pod, the last time that Norwich City lost to Ipswich. I'm now 25, so I feel like that's not bad going. It almost feels as if there's almost like a weight off the shoulders, because this season especially, a little bit, well, I say a little bit, not as much this season, but quite a bit under David Wagner. It almost felt inevitable. It felt like, right, it's not if, it's sort of how, and what will the score be, and will it be a heavy defeat? Obviously, the two derbies under David Wagner are very different to the one we've just experienced, but I'm all right. Football is a cyclical game, and we'll talk about the nature of it and where Norwich City are. But yeah, I'm okay. It's not a nice feeling. My match review was, I feel like it was quite raw. I struggled to almost get my words out because I was just so taken aback by what I'd just seen from a more of a footballing perspective rather than an emotional one. But yeah, we're here, aren't we? The world keeps turning, and we keep moving forward because it's only a game, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I say we can sort of delve into maybe some of the tactical sort of analysis, I guess, of how the game unfolded. What did you make of the lineup, I guess, that Liam Manning put out? Topic come back in and was sort of playing slightly more advanced in the midfield, which is something we've not seen so far. I saw a few other sort of tweaks and changes maybe to that team that we've seen maybe previously against West Brom. And when you saw that team at what would that been, a quarter to 11, what did you make of it, I guess, at that moment in time?
I wasn't. I think regardless of what the 11 was, especially given the current situation at Norwich and everything that's been going on, my feeling was just dread and fear and almost embarrassment before the occasion, before the incident, if you know what I mean. So I don't think the 11 really affected that. But specifically for that starting lineup, I saw Cordoba's name and I was a bit like, oh, I think I would have gone for Medic. But to be fair, within the first few minutes of the game, he'd proven why he'd been chosen, which was the pace and power. But I didn't mind the Topic and the 10. I kind of got it. It was actually probably the closest thing we've seen to this pragmatic approach of he's gone for physicality, not total mobility, but I got it. It was this idea, and it did match that first half performance, didn't it, of Norwich pressing as a unit and being a bit more proactive off the ball. And I think Topic in that role, I don't think he's probably the profile of footballer that you would describe to carry out that almost niche away from home, but I don't think he did it too badly. It's just, and this is more of a wider point to Norwich City, it's just lacking that creative spark and that technical ability, and where Norwich perhaps can't consistently get that press right, which is what I think that shape was based around. You then need the other side of the game. You need that creativity, you need that little spark, you need to be that threat on the counter attack, which, in the first half, Norwich held a little bit of that weight, but yeah, they were the two talking points for me. I respect the decision to not start Mahovo, and in the grand scheme of things, with the injury that he's had and the player that he is and how important he will be to Norwich, I completely get not risking him. My biggest fear remained the same from when we did our pod last week of fearing for Josh Sargent, really, and the isolation that he potentially faced and that he did face. Yeah, I don't think the lineup was too offensive, but yeah, the overriding feeling for me was just, it was anxiety, is what it was. It was anxiety, and things played out probably how we all expected them to, which it's done and dusted now, isn't it?
It is, yeah. That lack of creativity in midfield is interesting. I've seen a lot of people maybe talking about Jacob Wright being Norwich's, player who's created the most chances this season, yet he's not played since that Middlesbrough red card. Second home game of the season, third league game of the season, and feels like a lot of the players that are still starting, the likes of Sienats, again, didn't really grasp the opportunity. I thought maybe one of the bright lights, I know he grabbed the goal, but Oscar Svartau on the big occasion stepped up to the mark.
Yeah, Schwartau in this time of like desperately looking for hope, I think Oscar Schwartau almost plays that Luke Skywalker role of he is sort of almost the last hope that we have, and he's almost been quite joyful to watch, and actually it is almost a breath of fresh air in an atmosphere that stinks at the moment in terms of just someone who's willing to run, someone who technically you can clearly see his qualities and you can see why Norwich signed him. And again, he's a very young man and he's played a lot of football, but he's in year two of a complete culture change. I remember when he first signed for Norwich and almost that behind the scene documentary they were doing under Thorpe's first season. Where he was speaking about how it was the first time he lived away from home and stuff like that, and it's really pleasing to see the way he's developed, and I'm sure we'll continue to. And there was almost that discussion, wasn't there, in terms of, well, what is he, what's his role, how do we get the best out of him? It seems as if, to Manning's credit, that maybe he is starting to extract some quality from him. And yeah, I think especially the occasion considered, because you don't really have to be at Norwich City for very long to feel how important the match is. And I mean, before you even look at the fact that it's Ipswich Town, the context of where Norwich are probably adds a whole load of pressure, especially to such a young man and a young player and someone who's so new to all of this over here. The fact it was against Ipswich, yeah, I'm really pleased he scored his goal, and in a time of, I don't want to call it like desperate need, because I don't think we're quite there yet. I think we're heading there, but in a time of almost desperate need, Oscar Schwartau for me is exciting. And let's see what the future brings for him, because again, he is someone who needs that run of games. He needs a fair crack at it, and I feel like you mentioned Cianats. I feel like if I'm Eurosec, I'm almost wondering, like, what's he done to prove that he deserves a better crack at it than what I do. And I like Cianats. I do think there's the potential there. I can see what he is, what he's good at. It's just, as I said, if I'm Eurosec, I'm looking at not even the money that they spent on both players, because they're, for Norwich City, they're fairly handsome figures, aren't they? But I mean, something must be seriously different between them in training, because at this point, Cianats, he needs a rest, and I don't think he actually played that badly against Ipswich on Sunday. I think Cianats he did that thing, didn't he, where he gets the ball and he can take someone on. I don't think I've for quite some time seen someone with that ability to, probably not since Stevenman really, where this sort of gangly bloke can just make the ball stick to his left foot. He really has that innate ability to do that. It's just when he gets into a position where he has to make a decision, he seems to almost just either shank a pass, or occasionally he'll just like completely miss-hit a shot as he did against Ipswich, or he'll then turn around and go, oh, I want to try and do that again. So if I'm Eurotech, I'm thinking, like, Gaffer, give me a chance, mate, because what more have I got to do? But it speaks to the wider point of the direction that Norwich are going in. But yeah, Schwartau, really, really pleased for him.
Yeah, I don't feel like we need to maybe dissect all of the goals and what went wrong within certain moments, because we've done a lot of that in recent weeks over the
We've got to
course.
applaud the goal, though. We've got to applaud the screamer. Like, as football fans, a goal's a goal. I'm not going to sit here and try and sort of tell you that Big Vlad should have saved it. But I mean, it's a screamer. What can you do about it? We've seen many a Norwich screamer versus Ipswich. Sometimes you just got to tip your hat.
Yeah, I guess substitutions maybe is another interesting talking point. We've done a lot of talking on that as well. And Oscar Schwartau, we just had that conversation there. He was one of those that was, made way in sort of the early parts of the second half. I think it's about the 63rd minute. And the first half, okay, it wasn't great, but it was maybe an acceptable half, and Norwich were still in the game. Second half, I sort of thought, okay, now we need to see what we haven't seen so far this season. Norwich come out, be on the front foot, try and take the game to Ipswich, grab a goal, and it didn't materialize at all like that. The substitutions didn't really seem to add anything. If anything, they sort of stifled everything that the Norwich were trying to do. So what do you make of that at the moment? Because clearly within games, some of the impact of those coming off the bench not really being overly positive. I know McCarma's maybe been one who has taken his opportunities in recent weeks when he's been coming off the bench, but they didn't really have a positive impact.
There's two sides, isn't there? There's the implication of the squad he's been given to play with, which I think we'll turn to that a bit later, won't we? That's going to be our talking point today. That's what we're going to really sort of dig our teeth into. But there's the other element of, I actually understand taking Schwartau off, because the guy was blowing. Like, he'd earned the right to essentially come off to a round of applause. It was just the substitutions that were made a little bit later in the game, I think should have been made at the same time. But Norwich City have a real mentality issue at the moment. I almost don't think it matters who is coming onto the pitch, because clearly there is something that has infected these players, that there just feels like very little resilience, which is a stark contrast in terms of the performance between the first and second half. Because in the first half, it felt like, and again, I feel like the bar is very low for our standards, but it felt like there was this joint effort to press, and Ipswich, it's sort of, almost dwindling on the ball. It felt like Norwich could try and take advantage of that. But in the second half, I don't know what Manning's saying at half time, but there just seems to be this thing, doesn't there, of if there's a mistake, which there has been for weeks and upon weeks now, if there's that mistake, the heads go down. There isn't this sense of whoever comes on. I don't want to talk specifically about who came on for Ipswich, but whoever comes on, it doesn't feel like that there is anyone there to almost grab the game by the scruff of the neck. There's always been sort of these cult heroes at Norwich, haven't there? But at the moment, it doesn't really feel like we've got them. We sold Signs, we sold Sarah. You go even further back, it's Madison. It's Buendia. It's all those players that we've loved and said goodbye to. The only one at the moment is Josh Sargent, but he's in a position on the pitch where it's very easy to isolate, and as an opposition, it's very easy to isolate and to almost nullify. And at the moment, I don't know, that problem seems to be seeping through when it comes to second halves, when it comes to the need to make a change. There's no one on the bench at the moment where you think, right, let's get him on, let's chuck him in there because he can provide this. And I mean, who's an example of it at the moment? Like Jurasek. I don't know who you feel like is that option, but Jurasek is someone who's been here since January and done absolutely nothing. And we're having to make the argument of, well, why isn't he being used? As opposed to, well, we know what his qualities are, we know where his strengths lie. Like, do you know what I mean? It feels like a mess.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you say that. I mean, I heard someone say this on the train back actually the other day. They were kind of making the point of in recent years where maybe Norwich haven't had across the board the greatest of squads. They've had those individual players that within moments, within games where, maybe it's tight, can sort of provide that spark or, provide that opportunity for somebody to grab the goal that Norwich required to get the 3 points. And, that is Gabby Zara, that is Jonathan Rowe, that is Borja Signs. In the current squad, you kind of look down the list and away from Josh Sargent, who at the moment can't do it all by himself because of how isolated he is up top, and he's having to drop a lot deeper than probably he would want to be, rather than being in and around that box and sort of banging in the goals that we know he can do at this level. You kind of look and think, okay, who's going to be the player today that's kind of going to provide us with that moment? And I don't really see who in this squad is going to provide that. Maybe Jurasek could potentially be that, but obviously on the early evidence that hasn't really been the case yet, and he's been here almost a year. So I think that is a problem, and that probably ties a little bit to the recruitment, which is clearly going to be one of the talking points as we sort of delve a little bit further into the show. But just touching lastly on this game, clearly there was a subplot to this, and it was a certain Chilean midfielder. I mean, what did you make of his I guess, reaction post game? I know we don't have to delve too much into this, and people won't want us to talk too much about it, but clearly it was widely shared across social media.
Um, there's two elements to the day itself and Marcelino Nunez. There's the fact that he's a when he wants to be, he's a fantastic footballer. And you can tell I'm a little bit nervous talking about that by that voice crack. He's clearly a fantastic footballer, and he made the impact on the game that Kieran McKenna would have wanted, other than scoring that free kick. When he lined up for that free kick, I think we all thought, please go easy on us here, because man, if that had gone in, this could have been a whole lot more painful. But it's almost that ability to make a team tick over, and that was the difference between Norwich and Ipswich. Like, you look at their triple sub that they made, Aziz, or whatever the Spanish guy's called. I'm ignoring him because I'm looking at Nunez and Jack Clark as two just fantastic top three championship players that they just bring off the bench to replace players who already have a lot of quality. That was the difference between Norwich and Ipswich in terms of the day, but also as clubs and where they are in their journeys. But yeah, the reaction after the game, I find it, I'm 50-50. I find it really bizarre. I obviously find it bizarre. I find it disrespectful. I'm astounded by it, in the sense of he's almost acting as if he was a prisoner of war that's been released, and he's trying to get revenge on the war generals who tortured him and held him hostage. That really isn't the case. He was adored by our fan base. He was loved, and we all wish he'd stayed. Yep, let's not even hide from that. We miss him in our team right now. But equally, given the response to him leaving and perhaps the uglier side of that and the side that, we would never participate in and the side that goes beyond football, I can't begrudge it. If I was an Ipswich fan, I'd be loving it. And it'd be the exact kind of thing that you would need to galvanise Portman Road and Ipswich fan themselves in not too dissimilar a position to us, but probably not quite as extreme in the sense of their season hadn't quite started as they planned, and they're actually trying to turn something around. Very different to us in the sense of they're bouncing back from relegation. We're just trying to hang on for dear life, but you need that catalyst to, and I can imagine he's been encouraged by all of his mates and teammates, and very clearly probably isn't the most intelligent of people, but what's he paid to do? Play football. So I'm not going to begrudge that. But yeah, I find it all bizarre. I'm completely over him and the personality. I'm more so just missing the profile of player and looking at the recruitment team and thinking, mate, if you don't buck your ideas up in January, then we're going to be making podcasts about a team who are heading for League One.
Yeah, and that is the problem. All the metrics at the moment do sort of put Norwich in and around that sort of bottom six rather than the top six, which was the objective outlined at the start of the season and sort of the summer that led to a lot of change. Liam Manning being appointed, and clearly there's a lot of talking around him maybe in his future. Clearly it's been backed out in sort of the media now within the last few days that Manning's going to get that chance against Bristol City at home in a couple of weeks' time, and this international break is going to be him working on the training pitch with this group of players, but recruitment is a wider problem, and that game in isolation, I think on Sunday, a lot of Norwich fans probably left that feeling it was inevitable, it was going to happen, and almost that sort of sadness and anger that should have led with the Derby defeat wasn't really there because of a lot of the wider problems and the wider context surrounding Norwich City at the moment, and recruitment is probably top of that, and that's kind of headed up, I guess, by Ben Napper, and clearly he's the one who's sort of driven, I guess, this sort of project and this change of the wheel that we saw in the summer. So where does maybe the blame for all of this kind of season thus far and the way it's unfolding lie? Because Liam Manning's getting a lot of critics, but is that completely fair and justified, or is there certain other people within the top of this football club that need to almost put their head above the parapet and come and take some some criticism?
Yeah, give me 5 minutes because I feel like I need to. I feel like I can almost get everything that I need to get out about Liam Manning out, and I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to look above him and start to dissect what is up there making the decisions. Because with Liam Manning, I think right now, and he's not shying away from it, he's not at all. With the squad that lays bare in front of him, he should be doing better. And Norwich City, as you say, the metrics suggest. I mean, the metrics in front of us. You hear all these different XGA and all of that, and the worst part is they're all being proven right. So you've got the classic, and you've the eye test. You've got sort of what is an underappreciated skill now of just watching a game of football. All of that indicates Norwich City are poor, and these players on a pitch who don't look like they have identity, purpose, desire, that does lie with Liam Manning, the coach. And he clearly is going to be afforded time to try and turn it around. But that is where almost we're at a point now where nothing is a surprise. There's no shock value. What we have to do now is we have to look at, well, why are we so annoyed? Like, why are we probably more impatient than what we were with Thorpe when he first started? Well, because when Thorpe was hired by Ben Napper, we were given this project of, well, we spent this amount of time looking into him. We're going to, this is Ben Napper's way of wanting to play football. This is how he wants Norwich to lose. We appreciated the fact that the head coach, it's not all around an individual, it's around a role and principles and sort of disciplines. And it sounded great, didn't it? But we're now at a point where Ben Napper has messed the bed completely. And I think Liam Manning is suffering for it. And, I mean, let's talk about Napper. Why not? Because the recruitment, I think, and Paddy made this point on the Pinkham pod recently, but I really had been sort of feeling it myself in the sense of it feels like half of these signings, at the very least, were based around Thorpe. So you look at Fiskar and you look at Pella Matson, Harry Darling to a degree, Medic, but these more ball-playing defenders and sort of these midfielders who are a bit more well-rounded and suit a midfield three. Topic as well. Suit the midfield three. Fiskaren is obviously the number one example of someone who provides that attacking option, and naturally there's that Danish link. But it feels all very muddled, and it feels like Ben Napper has tried to build a squad for this bloke that he put so much time into, and you've got the classic like reports, haven't you, that the goalposts were picked up and moved. But you also got Thorpe basically saying it on that podcast that he went on. You've got Riddison, who's sort of almost cryptically just been tweeting it every few weeks. But yeah, I'm at a point now where I'm looking beyond Liam Manning. I do feel for him because he seems like just a decent fella. I'm not looking. Do you remember with like Dean Smith? It almost felt like you just didn't like him, and I felt like I had a problem with him and the way he was so blasé about everything. Liam Manning is really frustrating because he is essentially just like a high performance pod dream, isn't he, with his little sound bites? But that doesn't particularly offend me. And he seems like a good bloke. So I hate sitting here and having to almost just pick apart his footballing credentials. And I appreciate that I'm just a supporter, but none of it is personal. It's just I'm looking at something that is just so divinely uninspiring. And I'm at a point now, as I said, as I keep saying, where there's not much more, but we will, because there are games there to be dissected, and we've signed ourselves up for this. But I'm always over dissecting his role, and I'm now thinking, well, hang on a minute, why is he dealing with this mess? And obviously, it's that man, it's Ben Napper, and I mean, it goes further up the chain as well, doesn't it? In terms of this exec committee who have overseen in the last 4 or 5 years, yet they all still retain their prestigious titles. They've overseen some really weird and funky decisions, most recently last Friday, and essentially have been just allowed to accept mediocrity. And they retain these very vague promises, don't they? Do you remember when the top 26 line came out? I'm just like, these promises are so vague, and it feels like no one's being held to account for what they're doing, which what happens from here, mate? Absolutely no clue.
Yeah, so I think, a lot of this frustration, I guess, surrounding maybe some fans feeling that Liam Manning's not the right fit or the right man. I see Watford are sort of in that cycle at the moment again. The sort of public humility, I guess, that surrounds that football club in changing a manager yet again, and ultimately it tends to lead to the same result, just mediocrity in the Championship for them over the course of kind of the last, well, sort of the same sort of period of time as what Norwich have suffered it at the moment. And Norwich seemingly every single year are in that cycle themselves at the moment where they seem to remove the manager, but ultimately the results don't change because it is headed up by people above the manager who, is in control, I guess, of the destiny that they recruit the players for said manager that they've appointed. And ultimately that accountability that you mentioned needs to probably be publicly accessible, I guess, and maybe certain individuals should come out to the media and talk. Clearly, that's not something that's going to be done in this period of time again. Having worked in the industry, I maybe understand kind of some of the reasoning, but also, I guess there is that side of it where you are a football fan and your club's maybe not, meeting the objectives that were set out, and there's a lot of question marks, and fans have frustrations that they want answered. So, I guess, are you maybe surprised that some of those in those senior positions, probably most likely Ben Napper, aren't going to use this period of time to come out and almost talk to fans, because his predecessor in Stuart Webber, I know to his detriment, it probably led to his demise to a degree. But one thing you can't really criticize him for is coming out openly speaking in difficult moments where maybe some of that criticism is angled towards a head coach, and he's almost taken that away, put it upon himself. And 9 times out of 10, to be fair to him, to his credit, it ended up working out for the best for Norwich.
Yeah, Norwich have always felt like a club who are quite candid with fans, and I mean, there's always been sort of the almost the secrecy element of Norwich, and with any football club, with any business really, that's inevitable. But it's always felt like, and I, as a supporter who has grown up with the football club and seen, I feel like, quite a lot of change in my 20 years of going to watch them, I've always felt like I have a pretty good idea of what's going on, and that includes now, in the sense of like when Mark Atanasio sat and did and you'll remember from your time there, when Mark Atanasio sat with the Pinkham boys and did the pod, he spoke very candidly, and it was a bit, and I don't mean to offend anyone here, it was a bit American with the sound bites he was using, and there was that element of, he was quite vulnerable with, look, I'm not a total football guy, but I'm a businessman and I've got football people around me, and it's a joint effort, and I could almost buy into that. But what we're asking for right now is, so personally, I don't want Liam Manning as a manager. I'm not going to sit here and like actively campaign against him because, again, we're running these issues up the flagpole, aren't we, to be fully corporate. But what you're asking is Ben Napper to sign his own execution order, because if he fires Liam Manning, which it almost just feels like it's inevitable, for rightly or wrongly, he has to go as well. Mark Atanasio said something really powerful when he did that Pink and Media and the general media, which was he was surprised that Ben wanted to sack Thorpe. And to me, I'm surprised that's not been mentioned more, by the way, in terms of within the professional and fan media. I'm really surprised that we don't still reference that Atanasio was, the guy himself was so surprised that Napa wanted to sack Thorpe. That's such a powerful thing. It's your club's owner on a public channel, almost, and looking back on it, we've got that beat of hindsight, haven't we? But almost being like publicly like, yeah, no, I was as surprised as you are. Which is, again, I feel like I have to mention it in terms of the point I'm making here, but you are essentially asking Ben Napa to put his hands up and go, yeah, I've got this wrong. And in a game of football, for the reasons that he sacked Thorpe, or he says that he sacked Thorpe for everything, because what was the soundbites? Oh, everything was trending downwards. That is what's happening with Ben Napa and his job at the moment. Yeah, he's gathered some great fees for players that perhaps shouldn't have demanded such fees, but he's also spent some serious money on players who aren't perhaps repaying that value. And I don't know. I don't know where it goes from here. And looking even further up, I'm worried because you've got at the moment. So, I mean, the way we look at Norwich City at the moment is right now, you've got a Stuart Webber's period, and then you've got everything that came before. Essentially, everything that came before is totally irrelevant now because you've only got the remainder of Webber's people and the current crop. The worrying thing for me now is you don't have, at the very least, that element of heart and the club's best interests, just from a fan perspective with Delia and Michael gone. If Ben Napa goes, I personally, in the same way that I don't trust Ben Napa to potentially replace Liam Manning, I don't have a reason to trust whoever is going to make that. It'll be the exec committee, but I don't have a reason to trust that they'll be able to appoint Ben Napa's replacement successfully, which is where it's really worrying. Because again, to reference the point I made with the Atanasios and how candid Mark was about not necessarily being a football guy and learning his trade and learning his new business venture, it's worrying to me because the people who are almost teaching him that, I'm like, oh, hang on a minute, these guys have overseen 4 or 5 years of, well, it's a downwards trend, isn't it? If we want to talk about data and how Norwich want to have that money ball approach, man, what's the positive data here? What are we looking at here as a reason to be hopeful, as a reason for Ben Napa to keep his job, as a reason for the exec committee to go, look, we're being successful in this department. But yeah, mate, I don't know who I'm holding accountable at, and I don't know who I want to make the decisions to replace certain roles. It's concerning. And, Norwich City are sleepwalking, not just into League One, but into being a club that perhaps, and, this is where Ipswich is such a poignant reference, we could just turn into them. And, and John Punt, credit to him, on the Along Come Norwich podcast, said Norwich could be anywhere in their banter years. And, I used to almost snuff the idea of that and the idea that it could be in League One. But I'm sat here right now, mate, thinking I have nothing to argue against that point, which is it's worrying massively.
Yeah, I mean, this is slightly hypothetical maybe and a difficult question to answer, but clearly the critics at the moment around, Ben Napa are growing, and the Atanasios are clearly, bought into Norwich City and this sort of club, and clearly their ambitions are big and pushing this club more towards the Premier League than League One. So I guess how long do they let this linger in terms of Ben Napa and sort of backing him and leaving him to guide this club forward, because they're almost in control of his destiny, I guess. And if he's in control of Liam Manning's destiny, I guess, and those two are almost part and parcel at the moment, because as you said, he would be signing his death warrant if he goes and sacks Liam Manning, because that would be him gone at the same time. But do the Atanasios, I guess, pull the trigger before then? And maybe does Liam Manning, I guess, survive off the back of that? It's all very hypothetical, a little bit difficult for you to break down, but that's kind of my train of thought.
When I don't know. I really don't know. In terms of actual replacements and when, I'm more focused on probably the manager, because I think there are managers out there who could get a finer tune. And if you want names, Danny Roll for me is someone who I truly believe could do a better job. And I feel like Danny Roll when if Manning gets the chop or approaches the chop, Danny Roll's going to be the name that gets thrown around. And I did hear a criticism of, well, hang on, if he was good enough, he'd have a job by now. But from the stuff I read, he applied or he interviewed with like Leicester and Southampton, and in my mind almost, they went for more. I think for Southampton they went for the Will Steele element, which is proving to perhaps not be as great as they once thought, and Leicester have clearly made the wrong decision, or well, had made the wrong decision with Cifuentes, and I don't really know how that's going now, but in my mind Danny Roll has probably got enough, to quote Liam Manning, he's probably got enough credit in the bank to probably wait for an opportunity. And there's a small part of me that thinks, there's a bloke who probably knows the Championship, that he's waiting for this job. But with Ben Napper and almost when do they get rid of him, it will be when Manning goes. When that is, for me, sooner rather than later, please. For the ownership group, I would imagine there's almost that sort of halfway point that they want to get to in the season, and a reason to be perhaps hopeful. So one, Norwich needs to start winning at home, and fans need to start seeing something on the pitch. But if we get to Christmas and we're having the same discussions of, oh, here's the potential, why aren't we doing this, and we're sitting between 12th and the relegation place, I imagine the trigger will get pulled, and what that process is to replace Ben Napper, I don't know. Are they already thinking of replacements? Yeah, I'd probably imagine so. These are, at the bare minimum, these guys are business people who you have to plan for, especially within the venture that they're in, and generating capital and being money men. They always have to plan for eventualities and what ifs. So I very much imagine that discussions are being had privately amongst themselves of, well, what do we do with this? What do we do with this? And Ben Napper's not immune to that. He's just the guy leading the football side. So I imagine the discussions are already being had, and Ben Napper will be feeling pressure. He can come out and give it the I'm not, and no, I'm confident, and essentially what Liam Manning's doing. He can almost repeat those sound bites, but he will be feeling pressure. And as someone like him who's worked in football long enough, you know the signs of when you're under pressure. But it's interesting. You mentioned the transparency. Your point earlier in terms of the transparency and how Norwich have established themselves. I read an interesting tweet about, and I sort of looked into it after seeing it, from Dan O'Hagan about Germany and the sporting director role, and how Norwich were pioneers for it to come over here. And do you remember when Stuart Webber was hired? Everything felt very fresh and very new, and we almost relished that open honesty that perhaps had been missing for a little bit. And clubs have now very much gone towards that model. In Germany, they're much more candid about it. So I wonder whether we'll reach a point in the Championship where clubs are like that. I imagine, and not to make it political or geographical, but as in England, it's typically like not how we are as people. We aren't sort of candid with our emotion and feelings, and things are almost bottled up. So I can't actually imagine it getting to that point, but I think it would really benefit from getting there, if you know what I mean. But yeah, I don't know when the trigger would get pulled, but I guess we'll probably see, won't we?
Yeah, so I guess the bigger picture now is we've got this couple of weeks before the Bristol City game, and I think we saw probably some of that sort of apathy and frustration, and the Carrow crowd was quite visibly down in that home game against West Brom. So I guess what I guess can Norwich in this 2-week period do before that Bristol City game, which I know we'll talk a lot more about next week and preview that game in sort of a bigger, wider discussion, but this next 2 weeks, I think the fans kind of on social media, I think will be quite quiet, because ultimately the sort of talking points and the frustrations, fans feel that certain individuals should come and talk. That's not going to happen. They feel that certain people should be changed in certain positions. That's not going to happen. So ultimately, it feels like we're kind of going to have a 2-week holding pattern to a degree.
Yeah, the real problem. Well, I say the real problem. Well, the biggest problem at the moment is it's not just about football. So when you talk about Norwich City at the moment, you've almost got sort of, it's dealer's choice of what do you want to moan about. Like, and I know as people from Norfolk, and I know as Norwich City fans, it's in the nature, isn't it, to pick out the worst elements. But I'm an optimist at the best of times, and to be fair, since we started this channel, you probably wouldn't think so, but it's not just football. There are so many elements of Norwich City right now that feel so out of touch and out of sync, really. Looking at it from someone who runs a business, obviously absolutely nothing like Norwich City, but as someone who tries to have a little bit of an idea about, and as someone who's always willing to learn as well, I'm looking at Norwich City as a club, as a business entity at the moment, and thinking, what the hell is anyone doing? Like, and it's not just what are you doing, it's the communication of it as well is really just all over the place and really almost of poor taste, to be honest with you. But in these 2 weeks, if it's not talking about a match day, if it's not talking about a specific player and why aren't they doing this, or wow, that's positive, let's see more of a certain thing. It's the other elements of Norwich. And in these 2 weeks, Adam, I don't know. I don't know what Norwich City can do to try and patch it, because the first place they're going to want to start is, one, it's addressing this thing we'll speak about in terms of the stadium development, but they need to win some football games. But not just that, as we've seen, they need to actually put on a display. They need to essentially put on a display like West Brom at home and win, because, and I almost had the reverse effect for example, after Coventry, I was really happy with the point, but then it turned into, Jesus, wow, we got battered, didn't we? Whereas it's been the reverse for West Brom. Straight after West Brom, I felt the emotion, and I think it sort of bled through into my match review of, oh, why aren't Norwich doing this, that, and that? But then you almost take that instant emotion away, and you look at the game of football and think, actually, yeah, Norwich probably weren't too bad, and in the grand scheme of things, there probably is something to build off. And again, it's the first half versus Ipswich, but Norwich in a position now where they need to marry that with a positive result. And yeah, I mean, let's move on from the football, but it's got to start with winning a game of football, and sadly, we're not going to do that for at least 2 weeks. So and I mean, watching England as well isn't exactly the most exciting thing at the moment. So it's not, there's no element of escapism, is there? So yeah, for the next 2 weeks, absolutely no idea what Norwich can do to repair things, or begin to repair things.
No, I think it's kind of been seen a little bit across social media. It just feels like, fans are starting to be, well, almost disconnected. That apathy has really set in. For me, that Wrexham game, the sort of response after that was frustration, anger, disappointment at the way that game unfolded. But since then, and I've sort of felt this myself, maybe in a different way, I guess, because of maybe my personal situation and sort of having been involved 24/7 around the football club for 4 years, and maybe now sort of trying to take a little bit more of a back seat. But then when you kind of look at what's happening around the football club as a wider sort of picture, and sort of the results on the pitch, and the stylistic problems that they're having, the sort of lack of anything really to cling on to from a positive sense. And you look at that Ipswich away crowd on the fans that were there on Sunday, and are sort of part of that. It wasn't really as toxic or as angry as you maybe would have expected. A lot of the sort of fans just left, sort of before the whistle went, to get on those trains home, and that's sort of a signal, I think, of where this football club's at the moment. And that sort of disconnect and the fans' frustrations and feelings are only going to be heightened because of that sort of stadium Carrow Road development, that which we're going to now talk about. And it's going to affect a lot of people who have sat in certain parts of Carrow Road for years on end. I mean, I was sort of, before my sort of stint at the Pinkham, was a season ticket holder in the lower Regency, or River End, as maybe some fans would prefer to call it. And I spent sort of 7 years there. My mum's inherited my season ticket. She sort of, became friends, or I guess, with a lot of the people that were surrounding me. I know you're, someone who as well, who sort of sits in that part of the ground. So how does this, how's this move going to affect you personally, and maybe some of those memories and the people that you sort of attach that part of the ground to?
You probably just sat there thinking, right, how can we set Ben off? So there's a lot to it. There's a lot to it. Initially, I'm furious that I've got to move, because I like where I sit, and I don't feel like there's been any preparation. There's been no consultation. As sort of almost your average Joe supporter, it feels like they've just said, screw you, you've got to move because we want to make a few quid. So there's the initial, I'm really not pleased about that. But if you actually sort of look at it, I mean, Jesus, there's so many points you can make. One, the timing. Hideous. Like, read the room, guys. Goodness gracious. I almost think, regardless of results, you've got to just slap it in the middle of the international break, where people can, I mean, one, you've got to speak to fans first, but look, they didn't do that. But you've got to slap it into the international break, where people almost aren't riled up by, either the anxiety of another match and feeling like Norwich are going to embarrass themselves, or the rage of a post match. So that is just ridiculous. So read the room, PR wise, Jesus, what a nightmare. Also the wording of, well, we're delighted to, whilst we're all talking about every element of the football club under the sun just being completely wrong. So you've got that. You've also got the logic of how this ownership group and the people who run Carrow Road clearly just don't understand it. So moving the only little bit of rapport you've kind of got at Carrow Road these days is the lower Barclay and the away end. And that is the remnants of maybe what once was an atmosphere at Carrow Road. For the record, I don't really think the atmosphere at Carrow Road has ever been brilliant. I have no issue with that. I'm not going to sit and complain about that. People who do, sure, fill your boots, but it's never been my qualm because I'm a lower river ender. Like, I'm not going to pipe up at any point. I remember being stood for My Football Writer once, filming Ben Kensel and that mob talking about Sing Up the River End. So I've always just thought, like, just don't even talk to me about that because I'm just so numb to it. But you're ruining that rapport. And you're moving also you're moving the away fans into what I think is better seating, which is it's just mindless and just utterly bizarre. But also, Carrow Road as a stadium is you've kind of got the Wensom corner, and you've got the family element of people who have been who sit in certain areas around the lower river end because they know it's almost like a child friendly environment. It's just generally sort of the more placid side of Carrow Road. I don't want to say friendly, like the Barclays hostile. It's the quieter area. It's the area where you don't have to be like mad to sit. And I mean that with friends. I say that with friends who sit in the lower Barclay and who are bananas. And it's almost they take it upon themselves to be the atmosphere and the life of Carrow Road. But now you just chuck the away end in there, and I'm like, it's going to ruin, it's not just going to ruin my experience as someone who has to now move, but it's going to ruin the experience for people either side. And again, it's just one, it's the no consultation of anyone having any input, but two, it's the just understand your football club, understand your stadium, understand how it works. And I mean, Carrow Road has been around long enough for there to be a pretty good idea of the dynamic of it. And it feels like they're almost admitting their own guilt by and just almost assuming liability for just being absolute plums about it, because they just did it like that and just made the decision. I don't know whether it's just being naive and thinking, oh wow, this really is good, or I'm more inclined to think we know this probably wouldn't go down very well, so it's almost going to be presented as not a choice. It's going to be, here's what's happening. And I mean, the most interesting part was the idea that they might try and extend the Jeffrey Watling stand. And I'm just like, one, just say a little bit more about that, because it's something that Norwich fans have wanted for years. But two, don't take it for granted that those seats will get like filled, because once upon a time, sort of maybe in peak Farker and even before that, when we were flowing with the Premier League more often than not, you would have filled that. You would have filled however many extra thousand seats you want to put in. But right now, after this 4 or 5 years of the numbers probably dwindling a little bit, it almost seems like arrogance, doesn't it? And the one thing we don't want as Norwich City fans is to be taken for granted. So there's all these different elements of how out of touch the current crop of Norwich City execs are with the supporters. And you mentioned your experience from a professional point of view. My experience as someone who was associated with and represented a fan group, the first thing I did, right, for My Football Writer was I filmed Connor Southwell talking to Stuart Webber. It was actually Stuart Webber's idea to video it. And it almost felt like walking into the club. It felt like there was this strategy and there was this attempt. And I remember meeting club officials who aren't actually there anymore, who were like, right, we're going to do this, this, and this for fans. And it felt like there was an attempt being made to almost bridge that gap between fans and club. And I'm not saying it's completely gone, because it's definitely still there. It has to be there. But at the moment, it doesn't feel like we could be any further from how personally I saw it. What would it be now? Sort of, well, 5 or 6 years ago. And for me now, sort of getting back into the fan media game, it's very different to when I first started. And I appreciate that maybe it definitely was a privilege at first, but right now it's just like, guys, we're so disconnected, and there's no communication, there's no give and take, there's no how can we learn from you? Like, it's just, oh, it stinks, mate. It absolutely stinks. And I think every fan that has taken issue has the right to. And I know, and at Bristol City, it's going to be the talking point, isn't it? And I know the conversation I'm going to overhear. I know the conversation I'm going to have with people around me. Um, and yeah, I just, I've spoken to people that I know who also sit in the stand, and are just gutted that their relationships and friendships and, you know, almost, just everything about the match day experience is just going to be ripped up. And what for? What for, Adam? I don't know. It's an absolute mess, and it couldn't have been timed any worse.
No, exactly. And you talk about that consultation. It's not only going to impact those people who are directly going to have to be moved. It's all the people that sit sort of in and around that part of the stadium, the Upper Regency or Upper River End, and maybe those that sit in those sort of community corners. And they're then going to now be in a situation where when they go and attend home games, they're going to have away fans mingling around the areas where they enter the stadium, and sort of some of those individuals are probably people that have selectively sat in those areas to kind of maybe keep themselves away from that. And there is also the logistics of maybe those that want to visit the shop after the game. You're going to have, sort of probably in the bigger games in sort of certain crowds where maybe the policing's a lot more heavier, probably going to have difficult access to sort of access those areas. So logistically, it feels like it doesn't really make a lot of sense. I understand maybe the reasoning for the fan zone and maybe trying to get as many fans in and around that area. And, you can sort of debate the positives and negatives of that. But I think logistically, it's an absolute nightmare. And as you say, I can appreciate the planning element, and they have to get it out there before it all sort of goes public. But the timing of it, yeah, just doesn't seem to fit right with the current situation at Norwich City. And I guess there's maybe a few positives. The talk of maybe the upgrades of some of the facilities that are pretty tired, and the fan zone. I mean, are there enough positives for sort of certain fans to cling on to? Because it feels like widely that a lot of the negatives that we've there just discussed pretty in depth. Probably overriding those emotions at the moment.
No, the answer is no. There's not enough to be positive about it. I've got 2 points here. The first thing is, it feels like the fan zone is just a really like gutless attempt to dangle this carrot on a stick to supporters to almost counteract these changes. It feels like, oh yeah, but we're gonna do this. Look at this shiny new thing. We're gonna do this. No, mate, not buying that at all. And the other point is, how do these people keep making these idiotic, ill-informed decisions? Like, how? I had to sort of stop myself there. How do people whose jobs and essentially their lives, because better than anyone that when you work in football, it's not 9 to 5, it's more than that. How do people who make all sit in the same? I guess you can look at the larger landscape of the country and stuff, but how do people who are sat in the room together make these decisions? I just do not get it. I feel like, as a 25-year-old supporter, as a person, as an individual, I'm looking at it thinking, guys, what the hell are you doing? And I've listened to all the fan media so far. I've looked at all the tweets, and there are thousands of people who feel the same. Yet, I don't know how many people are involved in the process. My brain is thinking between like sort of 10 and 20 people who are important enough to make some kind of decision. How the hell is there not a single ember of intelligence to just ask a supporter group, to know who to ask, to know who to consult with? Like, how are we getting to this point where just really stupid decisions? And that thing you mentioned there about the fan shop and how that'll be affected. How is no one? But do you know what would be worse is if the club now came out and be like, yeah, we did think about all this, blah 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 blah. Because at that point, I think I'd just write it off and be like, yeah, well, what's the point of going? Like, what is the point of going? Because the only thing that is giving me a little bit of hope, and you mentioned hope, the only thing that is giving me a little bit of hope is the idea that they're being naive rather than just arrogant and stupid and like almost just keen, over eager. I just, that's what I'm hanging on to for hope. And oh my God, Adam, how low does the bar have to be for that to be the source of hope? Because yeah, there's nothing, and I don't know how much longer it can go on for, mate. I really don't.
No, and the irony, I think, is the fact that they've sort of scheduled in a consultation for sort of middle of October to almost discuss why they're maybe making these changes and what it's
So
going to
that's
do.
tomorrow, which will
Right.
be, so we're filming this on October the 7th. That's tomorrow. And I've got a nice little Microsoft Teams link to sit in and listen to that. Of which, I mean, we'll see what comes up there because, oh, Jesus Christ, they've got some talking to do, haven't they?
They have indeed, yeah. And I think that sort of flirting with defeat that maybe we've seen within, certain games so far this season. I kind of get the feeling that a lot of people that maybe sit within those areas are sort of that disconnect, and that feeling of frustration is probably going to lead to season tickets in those areas. People deciding, actually, you know what, as a customer, I don't feel valued here by this football club, and I ultimately don't feel like I'm getting what I've sort of signed up for, and that's a club that maybe cares about the fans and those individuals who ultimately pay their hard-earned money on a Saturday afternoon to go and watch their team, and to then be treated in a way where they don't even get consulted about decisions as big as that, which is ultimately moving people away from people or seats that mean certain things to certain people if they've sat there for years or had family members who are no longer with them that have sat in those seats. Those memories are ultimately being ripped away from them for sort of no sort of reason other than, unfortunately, in elements, corporate greed, which is it's kind of a sad state of affairs, and ultimately where Norwich City are at the moment. It feels like we've kind of been going for 45, 50 minutes, Ben, and it's been a lot of negativity and not much positivity. So I
Well,
guess
we knew it would be, yeah.
so okay. Have you got any positives, I guess, to end the pod?
Um, Positive, no, but where I'm at with Norwich City and, to look back at the football is there is there's no part of me that doesn't want Liam Manning to turn this around. I would absolutely love if I looked like a complete idiot and Liam Manning got a tune out of this squad and that Ben Napper actually used January as an example. He used January to perhaps address the issues with the squad. I would love that so much. I would. It would give me something to believe in. Whether I think it'll happen or not, to me at the moment is irrelevant, but it's what I want. Um, so I'm never going to be one of these fans who boos and throws abuse at players. I'm never going to be like that, and I don't really feel like I want to abuse anyone at the moment, to be honest. Other than the bloke who went down the road, but I just it's interesting because and I think it's the only pod to really do it in terms of along come Norwich and looking for reasons to be positive. Claire and Thomas on the along come Norwich pod, I thought, put up a good fight for being hopeful, and this idea that, for example, that West Brom game, if Norwich had won, it would have been a very different feeling. It probably would have, and that first half against Ipswich is probably enough to actually say there has been a little bit of improvement, but it's marred by the fact that they just need to win. And I don't feel very hopeful about it, and I don't expect Carrow Road to feel the same either. I really think Liam Manning and whoever the 11 are that step out onto the Carrow Road pitch against Bristol City, they're up against it from the start. The crowd will sing on the ball City. There'll be that little attempt, and hopefully the drummer brings his drumsticks and tries to generate some sort of atmosphere, but they're going to be up against it. And the only thing that can remedy it is a win. It's just goals, at least, to be honest with you. And also, this decision needs to be reversed off the pitch. There's no negotiations. It's don't do it. That's where I sit on it. It's don't do it. Think of something better to make more money. I don't want to fall into the trap of being careful what you wish for, because I appreciate that the Athanasios actually were vetted by Delia and Michael. And they have absorbed a lot of Norwich City's debt, and I appreciate that as a supporter, but that doesn't mean I then have to bend over and accept whatever is given to me. Because at that point, I mean, it's the larger point of democracy, isn't it? And being heard and being appreciated. I'm not just going to bend over and accept it. To put it in a very not nice manner. I sort of realised that as I said that then. But yeah, I'd love to be proven wrong. I'm going to go to Carrow Road. I'm going to support Norwich. Boy, do I hope that something goes right. I'm sure you feel the same, but yeah, I mean, that's what I'm going to be clinging on to.
Yeah, I'd echo pretty much all those sentiments. It feels like quite a big sort of period of time, I think, in sort of Norwich's recent history at the moment, the next couple of weeks. That Liam Manning derby as such against the former team. And I'm sure that every single one of those players will sort of be out to try and get a result against him. And clearly that fan base at Bristol, that's going to be interesting dynamic as to kind of how they, I suppose, sort of the reception they give Liam Manning and, maybe that's obviously going to play into the narrative around that game, and we'll do a lot more sort of previewing of that game and what's going to be entailed on next week's podcast. Of course, thanks for listening to this one. If you managed to make it the whole way through, hopefully there's a few positives there at the end, maybe to cling on to heading into what's an international break. We get the joys of watching England in a friendly against Wales, which I'm so excited for. I'm almost falling off this chair. So of course, with all the positives, I guess thanks for nearly 250 subscribers and all the views that you've been giving us recently. We really do appreciate the support. Hopefully you've been enjoying the content, even if it hasn't been overly positive. But we are praying and fingers crossed that there is going to be a few positives around the corner to dissect in future podcasts. So thanks for joining us on this episode, and we'll see you in the next one.